it was a great movie, but it seemed like there was resistance to that movie.
You got all those books, the Bible, you've got the different Gospels and stuff that people are quite familiar with.
What if one of the most controversial films in Hollywood history held a secret that almost no one noticed until now? Not a conspiracy, not a rumor, but something hidden in plain sight, woven into every frame, every shadow, every drop of blood on screen. Something that even the most devoted fans of the film walked right past without ever stopping to ask why it was there. That is exactly what happened when Mel Gibson sat across from Joe Rogan and started talking. And the moment Gibson opened up about what truly drove him to make The Passion of the Christ, the room went quiet. Rogan, a man who has interviewed world leaders, scientists, comedians, and warriors, leaned forward in his chair with the look of someone who just realized the story he thought he knew was only the surface of something much deeper. This is that story. To understand what Gibson revealed, you have to go back to the beginning. Not the beginning of the film, the beginning of the obsession. It was the early 90s, and Mel Gibson was at the top of the world. He had already starred in the Lethal Weapon franchise. He had just directed and starred in Braveheart, a film that would go on to win 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director. By every measurable standard, he had conquered Hollywood, and yet by his own admission, something inside him was completely falling apart. In interviews over the years, Gibson described that period of his life as one of the darkest he ever experienced. He spoke about spiritual emptiness, about feeling like he was standing at the edge of something terrible. He described it as a kind of death that does not kill the body, but hollows out everything else. It was during this period that Gibson began returning to his Catholic faith. Not the casual, surface-level religion of a man checking a box on Sunday morning. Something far more intense, something almost desperate. He began studying the traditional Latin Mass. He began reading the writings of mystics and saints who had spent their lives meditating on the suffering of Jesus Christ. And then he encountered something that would change the direction of his life entirely. He came across the writings of Anne Catherine Emmerich, a 19th century German nun and mystic, whose visions of the passion and crucifixion of Jesus Christ were so detailed, so visceral, and so emotionally overwhelming that they had been compiled into a book called The Dolorous Passion of Our Lord Jesus Christ. Gibson read it, and then he read it again. And again. He later said that reading those pages felt like being present at the actual events, not watching from a distance, being there, feeling it. That was the seed. That was where the passion of the Christ was born. Not in a studio boardroom, not in a pitch meeting, in the private, broken, searching mind of a man who was trying to find a reason to keep living. The vision takes shape. Gibson did not just want to make a biblical film. He wanted to create an experience. He wanted audiences to feel, not just understand, what the last 12 hours of Jesus of Nazareth's life actually looked like. Not the sanitized version, not the soft focus, peaceful paintings that hang in churches. The real thing. The brutal, physical, historically grounded reality of what Roman crucifixion meant. He brought in scholars. He consulted theologians. He hired Jim Caviezel, a deeply devout Catholic actor, to play Jesus. He insisted the dialogue be spoken entirely in Aramaic and Latin, the actual languages of that time and place, with no concession to modern convenience. This decision alone almost derailed everything before filming even began. Studio after studio turned him down. They told him the film was unmarketable. They told him that no one would sit through 2 hours of subtitled suffering. They told him that the graphic depictions of violence would alienate audiences and invite boycotts. They told him the language choice was commercial suicide. Gibson heard them all, and then he funded the film himself. He spent approximately $30 million of his own money, not a studio's money. His money. Money that, if the film failed, would simply be gone. He later told interviewers that he knew, on some level, that the decision made no rational sense. But he also said that he was not operating on rationality at that point. He was operating on something else entirely. He called it conviction. When Gibson sat down with Joe Rogan, most people expected the conversation to touch on the usual highlights. The controversy. The box office numbers. Maybe some behind-the-scenes stories. What they did not expect was for Gibson to start talking about what the film was actually trying to say beneath the surface. And this is where things became extraordinary. Gibson explained that the film was not, at its core, about violence. It was not even primarily about suffering, despite the overwhelming physical brutality depicted on screen. It was about something almost impossible to articulate in ordinary language. It was about what love looks like when it is taken to its absolute limit. He described a specific creative decision that most viewers never consciously register. Throughout the film, there are moments of almost impossible stillness. Amidst the chaos, the whipping, the screaming crowds, the collapsing body of Jesus under the weight of the cross, there are these brief, quiet pauses. A look, a breath, a hand reaching toward someone. Gibson said these moments were intentional, deliberate, placed with surgical precision. He wanted the audience to feel the contrast, not just between pain and peace, but between what human beings do to each other and what grace looks like in response. He wanted viewers to notice that even in the most extreme moment of suffering, the film's central figure is not consumed by hatred or despair. The response is something entirely different. Rogan sat quietly for a long moment after Gibson said this. Then he said simply that he had never thought about it that way. That is what Gibson was counting on. Not the obvious, the hidden layer. Gibson went further. He began explaining specific visual and narrative choices in the film that carry layers of meaning most audiences never pick up on. One of the most striking examples involves the portrayal of Satan throughout the film. Rather than depicting the devil as a monstrous, overtly frightening figure, Gibson made the decision to cast a woman in the role, Rosalind McCann, and to portray Satan as eerily beautiful, cold, almost serene. Present at every major moment of suffering, watching without emotion. Gibson explained that this was deliberate. He wanted to capture the idea that evil is not always loud and grotesque. Sometimes it is quiet, patient, almost elegant. It watches, it waits. It is there when you are at your lowest. He described a specific scene, one of the most chilling in the film, where Satan cradles a grotesque, deformed infant while watching the crucifixion. It is a dark mirror image of the Madonna holding the Christ child, life corrupted, love inverted. Most audiences see the image and feel disturbed without fully understanding why. Gibson said that was precisely the point. The image is designed to work on the subconscious level, to bypass the rational mind and reach something deeper. He also spoke about the use of slow motion at key moments in the film. When Jesus falls under the weight of the cross, the world seems to slow down. Gibson said this was not a stylistic flourish, it was a theological statement. In those moments, time itself seems to hold its breath. The weight being carried is not just physical, it is cosmic. He described how the cinematographer, Caleb Deschanel, used light in the film with extraordinary intentionality. The scenes in Gethsemane, where Jesus prays alone before his arrest, are lit in a way that makes him appear almost luminous against the dark. The light is not coming from a natural source. It is simply there, surrounding him, as if the darkness cannot quite reach him, even as it closes in from every side. Rogan mentioned that he had always found the film genuinely difficult to watch, not because of any squeamishness about violence, but because of something he could not quite name. He said it felt oppressively real in a way that no other film had ever achieved. Gibson smiled at that. He said that was the whole idea. But the road to that achievement was anything but smooth. When word got out about what Gibson was making, the reaction from Hollywood was not simply skeptical. In many corners, it was hostile. Accusations began before a single frame had been screened. Critics and journalists claimed, sight unseen, that the film was anti-Semitic, that its portrayal of the Jewish authorities involved in the trial and crucifixion of Jesus would incite hatred. Gibson responded by inviting scholars and religious leaders to review the film. He made changes based on some of those conversations. He removed a specific line of dialogue that had been particularly controversial. He maintained that the film was never intended to blame any group of people as a whole. He said the film's message was precisely the opposite. Every human being, he argued, regardless of background or belief, was implicated in what it depicted. That was the point. But the criticism did not stop. Gibson described the period leading up to the film's release as one of the loneliest of his career. He was fighting a battle on multiple fronts. He was defending the film's integrity. He was absorbing attacks on his character. He was managing the enormous financial risk he had personally assumed. And he was doing all of this while trying to hold on to the original spiritual vision that had launched the entire project. He said there were moments when he genuinely wondered if the film would ever reach audiences. And then it did. One of the most gripping parts of the conversation with Rogan involved the strange, inexplicable events that occurred during the actual filming of The Passion of the Christ. Gibson described multiple incidents that, taken individually, might be dismissed as coincidence. Taken together, they form a pattern that even the most rational observer would find difficult to explain away. Jim Caviezel, the actor who played Jesus, was struck by lightning during filming. Once. And then again. twice struck by lightning while portraying Jesus Christ on a film set. Caviezel also experienced hypothermia. He dislocated his shoulder during the filming of the crucifixion scenes, the result of the physical stress of being suspended in that position for extended periods. He contracted a serious lung infection. He endured a severe laceration on his back during the scourging sequence when a whip missed its mark. By the end of production, Caviezel had accumulated a list of physical injuries and ailments that read less like a film production record and more like a medical chart. Beyond what happened to the lead actor, there were other incidents on set that the crew found deeply unsettling. The assistant director, John Michelini, was also struck by lightning on 2 separate occasions during filming. The odds of any single person being struck by lightning are extraordinarily small. The odds of it happening twice to the same person during the same film production are almost beyond calculation. Gibson described the atmosphere on set as unlike anything he had ever experienced in his career. He said there was a weight to the production, a heaviness, not oppressive in a negative sense, but present, as if what was being filmed carried some kind of gravity that extended beyond the performance. He said that members of the crew, people who were not particularly religious, found themselves deeply affected. Some were moved to tears during scenes they had watched being filmed dozens of times in rehearsal. Rogan asked him directly, "Did Gibson think something supernatural was happening?" Gibson paused before answering. He said he did not know how to answer that in a way that would not sound strange to a certain kind of audience. But he said this: he did not believe those events were random. He believed the project, for reasons he could not fully articulate, attracted something. He did not say what. He left that for the audience to consider. When The Passion of the Christ was released in February of 2004, the predictions of commercial failure turned out to be spectacularly wrong. The film grossed over $600 million worldwide, on a budget of $30 million, financed by one man working against the advice of an entire industry. It became the highest-grossing R-rated film in history at the time of its release. It sparked enormous conversations in churches, schools, living rooms, and online forums around the world. Clergy reported unprecedented attendance in the weeks following the film's release. People who described themselves as non-religious said the film had affected them in ways they could not explain. Critics were divided. Some praised the film as a work of profound spiritual power. Others condemned it as torture, pornography, dressed in religious garments. The argument about what the film actually was and what it was doing to audiences has never fully been resolved, but the people who sat in those theaters in 2004 and the millions who have watched it since seem to find a resolution that transcends critical debate. They feel something. Gibson said that was always the only metric that mattered to him. Not reviews, not awards, not even box office receipts. Though the numbers were a vindication, he was not too proud to appreciate. He wanted people to feel something they had never felt before in a movie theater. Something that stayed with them when they walked back out into the daylight. By that measure, the film succeeded beyond anything he had originally imagined. And then Gibson told Rogan about what was coming next. For years, rumors had circulated about a sequel to The Passion of the Christ, a film about the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Gibson confirmed that the project was not just a rumor, it was real, and it was far more ambitious than anything he had attempted before. He described the challenge of the subject matter. The crucifixion is an event that, however brutal, takes place in recognizable human terms. Suffering, death, physical reality. A filmmaker can work with those elements. The resurrection is something else entirely. Gibson said the question that drives the sequel project is not simply what happened after the tomb was found empty. The question is what the resurrection means, what it implies about the nature of reality, about time, about consciousness, about what human beings actually are and what they might be capable of becoming. He described conversations with theologians, philosophers, and scientists. He said the film would not shy away from the strangeness of the concept. It would lean into it. It would ask the audience to sit with questions that do not have easy answers. He said he wanted the resurrection film to feel like the opening of something, not a conclusion, an opening. A door swinging wide. Rogan told him it sounded like the most ambitious thing he'd ever heard anyone describe wanting to make. Gibson nodded and said that was probably accurate. What Mel Gibson revealed in that conversation with Joe Rogan was not a single secret. It was something harder to name and harder to dismiss. It was the story of a man who, at the lowest point of his life, grabbed hold of something he believed in and refused to let go, even when the entire system around him said, "Let go." Even when it cost him money, relationships, and years of public attacks on his character. The Passion of the Christ is a film about suffering, but it is also, underneath all of that suffering, a film about what a human being looks like when they refuse to be broken by the worst that the world can do to them. Gibson found that story in an ancient text. He found it in the writings of a 19th century mystic, and somehow, at enormous personal cost and against overwhelming opposition, he transferred it onto a screen in a way that reached hundreds of millions of people. The hidden layer he described to Rogan is not hidden because it is obscure. It is hidden because it requires a certain kind of attention to see it. The stillness inside the chaos. The light that cannot quite be extinguished even as the darkness closes in. The love that does not calculate its cost. Those are the things that most people missed the first time they watched the film, and they are the things that make it worth watching again. In a world that often feels like it is moving too fast, too loud, and too cynically to allow for that kind of attention, the Passion of the Christ stands as a reminder that some stories carry a weight that does not diminish with time. Some truths, when they are told with enough honesty and enough courage, have a way of finding the people who need them. Gibson found his. Caviezel carried it on his shoulders, literally and physically, through lightning and injury and exhaustion. And somewhere in a movie theater in 2004, or on a screen in someone's living room last night, a person watched it and felt something shift inside them. That is what the film was always trying to do, and that is what most people missed. If this story moved you, if it made you see the Passion of the Christ in a new light, or if it stirred something you had forgotten about the power of conviction and faith, then we want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell us, did you notice any of the hidden details Gibson described? Has the Passion of the Christ affected you in a way you could not explain? If you found value in this video, please hit the like button. It helps more people find this content. And if you want to keep exploring the stories behind the stories, the ones hiding beneath the surface of history and culture and faith, then subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you never miss what we uncover next. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, because some stories are too important to keep to yourself.